Hello, everyone. I'm Isaac Mori, and this is Talk Commerce. Today, we'll be hearing from Elias Stahl, the founder and CEO of Hilos. They're changing how shoes are made with 3D printing, cutting waste, empowering designers, and bringing production closer to home. We'll be talking about design, sustainability, and the future of local manufacturing. What really stood out to me was Elias's vision for making creativity part of the supply chain itself. Me and Brent are both runners, so this is a very exciting episode for a few reasons. Let's dive straight into the conversation.
Welcome to this episode of Talk Commerce. Today I have Elias Stahl. He is the CEO of Hilos. Elias, go ahead, do an introduction for yourself. Tell us your day-to-day role and one of your passions in life.
Well, thanks for having me, Brent. Like you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Hilos, and I founded this company about 6 years ago with the vision of changing how the world makes and allowing every designer within everyone to be able to design and launch their own products into the real world. And one of my deep passions is history, whiskey, and swing dancing. That would be the tripod for me. And I would say in swing dancing, it's got to be East Coast swing. I don't even know what West Coast swing is.
Okay. I won't dig in too much there, but I did do a history tour in Scotland of whiskey distilleries, or Scotch distilleries, I guess. So that was super fun. But all right, that's super interesting, but we don't have time today for the swing dancing part either. All right, so Elias, before we get into that, you have volunteered to be part of the Free Joke Project. I'm just going to tell you a joke. You give me a rating 8 through 13. So here we go. I went to the beekeeper and counted 12 bees. He counted and gave me 13. Sir, I said, you gave me one extra. He said, that's a freebie.
On a dad joke, I'd say that's a good 11.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it was a freebie joke. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into designing, making, printing your own shoes?
Well, I was VP of product at a company called Handshake, and we were working with a lot of manufacturing companies, BMW, Caterpillar, Estee Lauder. And I was struck by how you could automate so much of the software on the fringes, but where and how we make is still this very grimy old industrial process. And nowhere is that more true than in footwear. So we make 24 billion shoes every year. 1 out of 5 goes straight to landfill. And it's because it takes the designer about 18 months to go from a design to the market. And there's a huge amount of telephone between a designer and their idea and the market. A designer is normally working in 2D, moving into a 3D designer, then taking into 3D, a developer, then developing it with a factory that's sampling it. That back and forth goes quite 10 months of back and forth before something's ready for production. And so inherent in the current process is a lot of waste, but also a lot of disempowerment for the designer. And I was struck with new technologies like 3D printing that can compress design and manufacturing into one and allow and empower the designer to be able to go from an idea and an inspiration to the real world, and at the same time reduce all of the waste that's inherent in the current system. And that creates a lot of opportunities for changing not just how we make, but where we make, while empowering a new generation of design.
Wow. Okay. So, explain a little bit about the process to get a shoe made. I have to imagine there's a bunch of different materials, and give us some background on that.
Yeah. So a shoe today is 65 parts assembled in 150 steps. 4 hours of labor goes into it on average. 400 hands touch it. And so because this is, commerce podcast as well, there's a very interesting, tidbit from Shopify. I think posts these reports every now and again. And 92% of footwear stores on Shopify sell under 1,000 pairs a year, meaning there's a really long tail in this segment. And footwear is emblematic of a long tail, right? So in footwear and apparel, you've got all these styles, all these sizes. It's really hard to know what you want to stock in advance. And so the design process is really long and expensive. The development process is really long and expensive. The manufacturing is long and expensive. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to have your costs low enough to afford all the waste inherent in that supply chain, but also in the long tail, right? You want to have 60 different SKUs and you don't know what sizes and colorways are going to sell a year in advance. So there's a lot of waste all across that, and it ends up all getting caught up at the end at the retailer, right? And you hear this all the time from online shops, but also from in store. We've all had the experience, you go in store and they don't have the size in the colorway, in the style that you want, because they can't carry all of that. So one of the benefits of our approach is we're allowing for design to then be translated directly into 3D, printed and made on demand. So 3D printing is a large part of this, where you take that 65 parts and that 150 steps in those 4 hours, and you condense it into a shoe that can be almost entirely printed. In some cases, it is entirely printed. And we have, as an example, we have a launch with Alexander Wang that by the time this airs will be public, that shows the first kitten heel that's entirely 3D printed that they launched on the runway in New York. And it embodies a completely new level of technology, performance, feel, fit, but that also takes that 65 parts and 360 steps and condenses it completely. And that is a huge change for retailers as well. And now you're moving from this is happening a little bit in apparel already. In apparel, we're not changing how we make, but we're able to move a lot faster. So in apparel, it's not uncommon for a big retailer to go from 9 weeks from design to on shelf, to start with 50 or 100 pieces. And then if it sells well, to do more. Like Zara, really pioneered that. You've got fast fashion like Shane doing a lot of that. And there's a lot of waste inherent in that as well. We won't talk about that. But the challenges with footwear is it's hard and soft goods. It's molded. You have synthetic, and you have EVA and foam and rubber. Really hard to do that. This allows design to be empowered, not at the expense of production and not at the expense of that waste. And it changes the retail dynamic in a really interesting way.
I remember I watched the Nike movie, and he was making his waffle stomper shoes with a waffle iron. Is that kind of the same concept that we're thinking of, where you're assembling these? And obviously, I don't think you can't print fabric, but is most of the shoes then something that you can make the majority of it with I don't know, non fabric, like the uppers wouldn't be leather or fabric, right?
Yeah, I mean, printing technology has evolved rapidly, and so we're able to print performance polymers that function like synthetic knits. So essentially, it's high performance plastic. We're printing plastics. And people say, well, do people wear plastic shoes? And my answer is, you're already wearing one. If you've worn a athletic sneaker, you're wearing one, right? So there's a lot of benefits to being able to design materials that have high performance qualities inherent in them. So we can print uppers, bottoms, outsoles, midsoles, and it can look exactly like a traditional shoe. It can look very different, and everything in between. And then the ability to increase right now the material stock is recyclable, but we want to get to biodegradable. We want to get to not just making less to begin with and having less waste, but also allowing for better end of life long term.
Do you think it's going to disrupt the market eventually? And I think, when I buy a pair of shoes, I buy a pair of running shoes, and if they're my everyday runners, I spend $150, but if for my racing shoes, I spend $280. Why would anybody do that? Is this going to eventually have the ability to, say, disrupt Hoka or Nike or Adidas or something like that? Or are those kind of edge case performance type of things that are really or that are engineered?
I think we're already seeing it. We're already seeing it disrupt a lot of the incumbents. So it's not for nothing that Nike launched a shoe with Zellerfeld, right? So Zellerfeld's the disruptor, Nike's the incumbent. And for Nike to feel like, okay, we've got to hop on this wagon, that means something to a lot of the other brands in the market. There's momentum building around enabling the creator to create what they want, not being sold something the brand thinks they want. And we're creators, all of us. And I think about what the iPhone camera allowed for photography, and what was very specialized and expensive became a lot more accessible and approachable. And guess what? People have a higher aesthetic now as a result. And so we as I think a people are becoming we're upskilling ourselves in how we think about photography, and we can do the same with product design. And tools like Interplay and what Hilos is building will allow the barriers to dramatically drop for designing actual product that you can bring into market and launch and make in real life. And that's exciting, not just, I think, for all the prosaic, business reasons for a retailer and the prosaic reasons of, the business, but enabling new kind of creativity and new kind of innovation. I mean, if you look at footwear today, it's not very innovative, and it's because of how it's made, right? We basically have two ways to make shoes. There's the handcraft European version, which South America now can do as well, but it's very, leather, old world kind of craft. And then we have the performance, which, Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, created and China perfected, right? And that the way that brands compete now is within that sandbox, and it all kind of looks the same. So how can we break free from that? And how can we allow the creator to be their own imprint, not the manufacturing technology? And that's what this allows.
I'm in a group called Entrepreneurs Organization, and I was at their conference back in April. Everybody was talking about tariffs, and everybody was there. There are all kinds of entrepreneurs in this group. They all talked about how hard it is to make clothing and especially shoes in the U.S. Do you think this sort of gets us past that worry about tariffs and the fact that you're not going to have you can't make it at scale, something that you're selling for even $100 in the U.S.?
I think it will partially. When we make 24 billion shoes globally, like I said, the U.S. is the largest global market. I don't think we're going to, in the next 5 years, scale 3D printing from millions of pairs to billions of pairs. It'll take longer than that. I do think that we will be making a sizable amount. Right now, we make less than 1% of the footwear we consume. I think we could be making 5 to 10% over the next 5 to 10 years. And it will allow us to think differently about the aesthetic. Like, imagine American footwear being its own unique aesthetic. Like, oh, that looks like an American shoe because it's designed with this completely new kind of technology. That would be very cool on a global level. But we're not going to invert the entire supply chain overnight. So it's always going to be a blend. One of the things that we're really excited about at Hilos, and I'm very personally invested in, is the Made in Old Town project, which is our answer for how we bring supply chains back to the US. And when we let manufacturing leave, we let a lot of our chance to influence and innovate leave with it. And so we're inviting that supply chain back, and we're doing it in a way that only America can do. We have in Portland and Oregon 500 outdoor brands, right? We have Nike and Adidas and Under Armour and Lululemon, and anyone who does footwear has an office here because it's a global source of talent. And as a result, suppliers that make materials or manufacturing technologies with actual factories themselves want to be closer to their brands. And so we're creating a 4-block campus within the old town of Portland to build manufacturing for footwear and apparel innovation right here in partnership with those brands. So we're taking what you'd have to send a team, for 6 weeks overseas to do and bring it right to our backyard. And there's a lot of benefits to that. And that's how we begin to bring supply chains back. And the best part is every city in America has their own old town. And every city in America has their own heritage of manufacturing. So how can we apply this to cities across America? Because we all have something that we can use to attract other technologies.
What are you most excited about in this space? Is it the fact that we can make one-offs that are super custom and exactly what the artist wants, or the ability to not have to import a bunch of things or send it over to China to have it manufactured? What is it that excites you most about this process, the small scale or the medium scale?
I'm excited about a lot of things, as you might have noticed. It makes me very excited to think about empowering anyone who wants to be able to design a shoe to be able to design and launch their own shoe, and the ability for new brands, indie brands, emerging brands to pop up nationally. I think about what happened in, I don't know if you like beer, home brewing. We had like 5 beers across the entire US, and they were all, not that good. And people thought that beer was Schlitz or Budweiser, right? Or Coors. And then Jimmy Carter signed a law that made home brewing legal. And it took like a decade or two, but in the 90s, there's this explosion of home brewers that said, this is so good, I'm going to open my own brewery. And now look at what you have today, right? We are globally the capital for beer innovation across the world, right? So think about that for what we're talking about here for footwear, and then for more than footwear. We like to say from footwear to furniture. Let's allow anyone to not just be the incredible photographer, incredible digital designer. Let's allow them to be a product designer. And let's be the center of that in the world. That's what gets me excited.
Yeah. So tell us about your solution. This is something somebody will be able to buy and bring home and then print their own materials, or is this something that maybe it's more of a manufacturing level that they're doing prototypes or they're doing one-offs or short runs?
So we have a product called Interplay that is the first no-CAD design platform for footwear design and development. So it's right now in beta. It's not available for everyone, but if you're interested in this, you can go to our website and book a demo. And ultimately, this allows you to design your own shoe and build it in 3D without knowing 3D, and then launch it into market. And we partner with specific platforms that can actually produce that for you. And in some case, offer even the front end for customers to buy. So we haven't gone public with announcing who those are yet. Those are going to be coming in the next few months. But this is like between now and February. These are the months where if you're interested in doing this, hop on the train early. And we want to be that partner where you can design and launch your own footwear. And today it's footwear, tomorrow it's furniture.
That's great. I have to ask you about tariffs and how they're affecting this market. And I suppose it's much less because you're making everything all there. But I have friends that are making foam things and different, like different products that are required to get different chemicals from around the world. And he's manufacturing in the US, but he's struggling with supply chain still. So I guess two parts of this. I heard you earlier talking about bringing back the supply chain to the U.S. I think that's the long-term answer, but I also heard you say that this is going to be a longer-term process, and maybe in the next 4 years there's not going to be this whole tariff thing again, and maybe things will revert to where the cheapest place to make it is. Is this give us your insights on that? And I know I just spit out a whole bunch of stuff, but tell us what your insights are on kind of that part of the tariff business and supply chain.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, even if you're manufacturing in the US, if you're importing your raw materials or intermediary inputs, then you can still have higher costs. And that's certainly the case. A lot of this is kind of the chicken and the egg story where the more production you do here, the more you can attract upstream supply chain. So if I make a lot of shoes here, am I going to also make the material to print the shoes here? How much volume do I need to be printing here before the material's made here as well? Part of the answer to that question is also based on trade barriers. So if there's a really high tariff for importing intermediary goods, it makes it more advantageous for that material company than base production in the US. That landscape, as you know, is changing quite a bit. So I think what would be probably the most helpful, you didn't ask for any any prescription to how I view it should be, but if there's an overarching industrial policy around which tariffs can align, then the supply chain will have the ability to plan and make those investments. Because I think at this point, the world recognizes that countries are pursuing industrial policy, and that's okay as long as it's written down and everyone can understand what that looks like and plan multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investments towards. And that's where Congress ultimately is a tool of that. I think could do a lot to be supporting that because it is in their remit to dictate trade policy. We shouldn't forget that. So that's where I'm seeing kind of longer term potential. In the short term, yes, it's more expensive for Ford to make something in the U.S. than for BMW to import something into the U.S. That's a problem. Specifically with what we're looking at in footwear, we have Oregon specifically accounts for 90% of footwear exports of the total U.S. footwear export market. And we do have a lot of overlap between what intermediary goods for footwear and other industries. So there is already a little bit of a base here, specifically when it comes to polymers and chemicals. We do have strong chemical companies in the U.S. And we have strong chemical companies in Europe that have U.S. presence. So I don't worry about that too much for the footwear industry, but I do worry about longer term, almost like emotional implications to these larger businesses. If you're talking to BASF or Henkel, these are businesses that have hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in different units that are also affected. So nothing is isolated, no man's an island. And I think we want to make sure that all the raw intermediate inputs can fairly invest in U.S.-based supply chain.
That's great, Dan. I apologize for the complicated question.
I apologize for the complicated answer.
No, it's all good. So, Elias, we have a few minutes left as I close out the podcast to give everybody a chance to do a shameless plug about anything they'd like. What would you like to plug today?
My shameless plug, I think I already plugged Interplay. If you're interested in designing and launching your own shoe, you can go to hilos.studio and find out more there. And then if you are a brand or a supplier or a manufacturer that share the vision for how to work closer with brands in the US or how to collaborate in a single campus, and then check out madeinoldtown.org, and would love to get you involved there.
That's great, and I'll make sure I get those on the show notes. And I did look at the Made in Old Town. That looks super interesting. Elias Stahl, it's been such a great conversation today. Elias Stahl is the CEO of Hilos. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Brett.
All right.